Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Jarson with Northeast Metro Climate Action. We are a community-run volunteer group. Our mission is to raise awareness about the climate crisis by doing outreach events like this and working with our elected leaders and just spreading the word in our communities about climate action. We've been doing these outreach events for almost 3 years now. The last year and a half has been on Zoom, obviously. We're hoping to get back in person sometime if we can get past the worst of this COVID. And we have members, our core members are in North St. Paul, White Bear Lake, North Oaks, Vadnais Heights, Shoreview, Arden Hills. We are looking for new members, new core members to work on our planning team. If you're interested in getting more involved in your community on climate action, go to our Facebook page or our website, which I'll put into the chat after I'm done talking, and send us a message, and we can bring you up to speed on what we're doing on planning, and then when our next meetings are. Our next planning meeting will be next Monday to plan our next activities and our future events. Tonight's event, we're going to be talking about food waste, which is a very big problem with the climate crisis. So we're going to learn more about that from Cassie Hagan of MN350. She's going to talk about the overall problem and some of the things that MN350 is doing here in the state of Minnesota. And we also will hear from Mariah Quick from the county. She is with the organics recycling group. And if you are taking your organics to a recycling compost drop-off site, we'll learn a little bit more about what happens after you drop that off. A few logistical things, if everybody can mute themselves for now. If you have questions, you can type those into the chat while they're talking. We may ask the question during the talk, or we may want to wait till the end. We should have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. And also at the end, if you want to ask a question verbally, you can just type in the chat, "I have a question," and we'll have you unmute and ask your question. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to Cassie Hagan from MN350.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Give me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay. Is everyone able to see that? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. So like Steve said, my name is Cassie Hagan, and I'm going to be talking about the problems that cause food waste, the impacts of food waste, and some solutions as well. So a little bit about me. I live in Minneapolis, and I'm from Woodbury, Minnesota. I graduated from the University of Minnesota this past December with a degree in environmental sciences, policy, and management. And I'm the volunteer co-lead of MN350's food waste group, which is a subgroup of the food systems team. I am also currently a Minnesota Green Corps member at the University of St. Thomas. And when I was an undergrad, I conducted research at the University of Minnesota's Institute on the Environment. Sorry, give me 1 second. Can people see the subtitles if I turn them on?
Yeah.
You can? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is subtitles something that would be helpful to anybody, or is that distracting? Okay, it's distracting to me, so we will keep them off, but I wanted to ask in case anyone was hard of hearing. So worldwide, a lot of food is wasted. An estimated 1 billion tons of food are wasted each year globally, which is 17% of all food that we produce. And in the US, it's 229 million tons that we waste each year, which is 35% of all food produced. You can see in the chart on the right-hand side that most food waste in developed countries occurs closer to the consumer, whereas in developing countries, it occurs closer to the farmer, which is often due to a lack of infrastructure such as refrigerated trucks and storage for agricultural products. And in North America and Oceania, we waste a lot of food. 42% of all food that is produced in these areas is ultimately wasted. And you can see that that's drastically different from all of the other areas of the world. So on the left, I included a chart of the elements of the food system in case anybody was less familiar with that. And on the right is a chart from the NRDC report Wasted, which shows how much food, or the breakdown by sector of food waste in the United States. So you can see that a lot of food waste occurs at the household level, followed by restaurants and farms. And there isn't a ton of food waste that occurs at the manufacturing level on the United States level. However, a lot of food waste is created through manufacturing in Minnesota. And in total, 1.5 million tons of surplus food was generated in Minnesota in 2019, which is data from the most recent year available. Similar to the United States as a whole, a lot of this is from the residential sector, and then followed by manufacturing and food service. Manufacturing is such a big portion of this food waste because we are such a large producer of agricultural products in Minnesota. And you can see that farm waste is not as high as at least I would expect it to be, but it's important to note that in this graph, it's only showing produce from the farm. And I believe that this data doesn't include food that is that's harvested but doesn't leave the farm, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a few slides. So this slide is also showing food waste in Minnesota from 2019, broken down by food type. So you can see that the largest portion of our food waste is dairy and eggs, followed by produce, which is pretty consistent with the rest of the United States. And prepared food is also wasted quite a bit, which makes sense since prepared food can't be, or the demand for prepared food can't be estimated as well as other types of food. One thing that's really interesting that I actually learned in the EPA webinar that was put on today is that seafood waste is often highly underreported in the United States because 80% of our seafood is imported. So things like bycatch are not something that's tracked by this country. So fresh meat and seafood is definitely underrepresented in this chart. And interestingly, one main way that the United States differs from other developed countries is that we waste a lot more meat and seafood, which of course has very big climate and land implications. So why should we care about food waste? Well, food waste, besides just the social and economic impacts, has a lot of environmental impacts that come from embedded resources. 2.6% of all US greenhouse gas emissions are produced by food that we don't eat, which is the equivalent of 37 million passenger vehicles worth. And 21% of all US water used for agriculture is used to make wasted food, which is about 15% of all water used for all uses in this country. 19% of all croplands are used to grow food that is ultimately wasted. And 18% of all farming fertilizer is used to grow food, which also that we waste, which is also a problem in contaminating the water that we have. And 3.9 billion pounds of nutrients are wasted through farming fertilizer. In addition to the environmental impacts, we waste a lot of calories that could go to needy people. 1,250 calories per person per day, to be exact, are wasted, which is over half of the recommended daily intake for adults. And this is really staggering when you think about the fact that 42 million people in the US are hungry on any given day. It would only take a quarter of the food that we already waste to feed all of those hungry people. And lastly, food waste costs us a lot of money. In the United States, we waste about $218 billion every year on food that is thrown away, which is equal to 1.3% of the US GDP. My next arrow is not working. There we go. So I wanted to go into climate change a little bit more. On the right, you can see this pie chart of what produces greenhouse gas emissions in the US. If you add up food waste in agriculture and land, that accounts for about a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions, and wasted food itself makes up 7%. It has a lot of climate change implications, both in production and when food isn't properly disposed of. Food waste in the landfill releases methane because it digests anaerobically in plastic bags, which has 25 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. And US food waste produces 113 million metric tons of CO2 or CO2 equivalent every year. In terms of actual fossil fuels that are used to bring food to our tables, it takes about 7.3 units of fossil fuel energy to get 1 unit of food to our tables. And 400 gallons of oil are used to feed one person in the US for an entire year, which I believe is the equivalent of about 33 car refuelings. And in the US, the average food item travels a staggering 1,500 miles before it reaches the consumer, which is a big portion of that fossil fuel energy that's used to deliver food. Now moving on to solutions. The EPA has this really interesting food recovery hierarchy that goes in order from most preferred solutions at the top to least preferred. It follows the same pattern as the reduce, reuse, recycle symbol that we're all used to. And it starts with source reduction and then feeding hungry people and animals, industrial uses such as creating energy, composting, and then landfill and incineration. And ReFed, which I mentioned earlier, and is probably my favorite food waste resource, you should definitely go on their website if you haven't already, has outlined 7 key action areas for reducing food waste. And this is from the report Roadmap to 2030, reducing US food waste by 50%, which is based on the EPA's goal to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030 in the United States. And I'm going to be talking about these 7 key action areas and some problems and what we can do within these key action areas to reduce food waste. So the first area is optimizing the harvest. I believe it's 9% of all food that is grown in the United States isn't even harvested, and even more than that doesn't leave the farm. Problems include the desire for perfect produce, or at least the farmer's perception of a desire for perfect produce, and rejection by grocery stores. So on the farm, there are a lot of reasons that a farmer might not harvest food, or if that food is harvested, that it might be plowed back into the soil. For example, this picture of cucumbers here is from a relatively small farm, and these were all cucumbers that were thrown away. When I look at this, I don't see anything wrong with these cucumbers, but some reasons that these might have been thrown away are they're too big, they're too small, they're bent, they have a little white dot on the end that people think is mold. That white dot is supposed to be there, by the way. So many reasons that are purely cosmetic that food is thrown away. And farmers sometimes won't bother taking these cucumbers and other food to grocery stores because of the fact that it costs a lot of money to drive food to be distributed, especially when you consider that the average food item travels 1,500 miles. So if farmers do bring food to a grocery store and the grocery store rejects the load, they often don't have the contacts that they need to take the food. And even if you are in contact with nonprofits in the area, most nonprofits don't have the capacity to store the amount of food that is donated or that is brought to them by truck drivers. So best case scenario, there's still a lot of food that is getting thrown away. And some solutions to this are gleaning, which is volunteers from nonprofits going to farms and harvesting the food themselves to be donated. Grocery stores selecting or accepting, partial orders, as well as nonprofits too. And then having contacts for surplus food. It would definitely be beneficial to have a network of food truck drivers and food nonprofits, so that in the event that a truckload is rejected, a truck driver has a place where they can take the food before it might spoil or they run out of time to donate it. Next is enhancing product distribution, which means making sure that everything that is grown and manufactured is distributed in a timely and safe manner. And some problems that can come in this area are time constraints and quality standards. And some ways that this can be solved on the retail end is a thing called first expired and first out, which is putting food that's going to expire first towards the front of the shelves. That will, most people will grab what's in the front. So anything that's going to expire first should be sold that way. Another strategy for reducing food waste in retail operations is putting markdowns or coupons on food that is about to expire to incentivize people to buy that first. As for quality standards, preventing food from being thrown away because of a perceived unsafe drop in temperature can be easily fixed by temperature monitoring. And another way to enhance product distribution is smart routing. So reducing that 1,500-mile trip to drop off food and dropping off or distributing food at locations in a way that maximizes the life of the food and minimizes time for it to go bad. Next is refining product management. This really means making sure that you know what to do with the food that you have. Some problems that come with lack of product management are ordering too much food, having excess food that you can't use before the date label is reached, and minimum ordering requirements. Oftentimes in retail operations and for restaurants as well, you can only order like a certain minimum quantity. So there's a lot of room for food to be wasted. On the right is a picture of LeanPath, which is this website that my friend Heather from MM350 told me about. And they are a company that will give you scales and an online platform to track your waste and your food generation so that you can better plan how much food you're going to need to order in the future based on your sales, which are two of the solutions combined: waste tracking and demand planning. And then from the distributor side, decreasing minimum ordering requirements would greatly help with reducing unnecessary food waste simply by not being able to order the quantity that you need. Next is maximizing product utilization. A big portion of food waste in Minnesota specifically comes from manufacturing byproducts that aren't utilized. ReFed identified that as the #1 action that we can take to reduce food waste in Minnesota, I believe, on both tons of food waste diverted and also on an economic scale. So problems include byproducts, like I said, so items that you're just not planning to use in the first place, a lack of planning, and then spoilage as well. So food spoiling before you are able to use it. And solutions to this are upcycling. So like the picture on the right, using like veggie scraps, for example, to make vegetable broth, which is one of my favorite things to do with my scraps. Having good menu design, so making a lot of food with just a few ingredients, so you're not having excess that you don't know what to do with, and then packaging that will prevent spoilage.
So Cassie, there was a question in the chat about the waste during manufacturing. This slide addresses that as the waste during manufacturing is the food scraps that aren't used during the processing of foods. Is that correct?
Yeah. That would be like, for example, if you're making like potato chips, all of the potato peelings that aren't used is that area of like manufacturing byproducts. That is a really big issue in Minnesota.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. And thank you for bringing that up. I can't see when the chat pops up in share screen mode. So also feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question as well. The next action area, which is probably one of my favorites, is reshaping consumer environments. On a large scale, this means changing the way that we value, see, and behave around food. We definitely have a tendency to not value our food very much, which comes with the fact that over the past century, we've become way more removed from farms and the food process in general. And on a smaller scale, reshaping consumer environments means individuals changing their, means individuals changing their own behaviors. Some of the biggest problems on the consumer scale that cause food waste are people not wanting the leftovers that they create, a lack of understanding about date labels, and then a lack of planning as well before you go grocery shopping. On the right is a picture of a graph from a study about consumer perceptions of date labels. And you can see that a lot of people don't know exactly what they're supposed to mean. For food quality, about 65% of people knew that those labels were what that meant. And for food safety, about 50% knew that those labels indicated safety. So a solution that is definitely necessary, that is probably one of the most talked about solutions I've seen on reshaping consumer environments in food waste studies, is date label standardization. There's actually no standard date labeling practice in the United States. So that would be very helpful in reducing consumer confusion and preventing people from throwing perfectly good food away before it needs to be. Another solution is portion sizes, specifically at restaurants, but also with how much food you're making for yourself at home. planning ahead and knowing how much you're going to eat, if you're likely to take home or save your leftovers, is a good way to reduce your food waste. And then meal planning in restaurants, but also at home as well, can reduce food greatly, or food waste greatly. Next is strengthening food rescue. Like I mentioned earlier, I work at the University of St. Thomas in like food waste reduction. So one thing that I'm doing is waste audits, and this is some food and a few other things in that left picture that my volunteers and I found when we were going through trash. All of this food that's shown, except for maybe the eggs, it depends on who you ask. My boss thought that the eggs were probably fine to eat, but all of the other food that's shown is for sure still usable. And a lot of it hadn't even passed its best by date. I wanted to include that to show the scale of the problem, and that this is a regular thing that happens, is food that's perfectly usable not being donated or otherwise rescued. And some reasons that food isn't rescued are not wanting to take the time to donate it, or not having the time or the staff in retail operations to bring food somewhere. Lack of storage, both on the side of consumers and restaurants and retail, but also for nonprofits. Like I mentioned on the slide that had the cucumbers, there's only so much food that nonprofits can take. And lastly is misinformation, specifically about food waste policies. So some solutions for this are increased communication about when food should be donated, what food can be donated, what food is accepted, education about donation policy. There's a policy in the US called the Bill Emerson Act, which basically protects any donator of food from liability if the food was donated in good faith. And a lot of institutions and restaurants are either not aware of that policy or don't trust the policy, I guess. So there's definitely some education that's needed on that. And also donation infrastructure. So things like having refrigerated trucks or enough storage space for nonprofits to accept donated food. And there are a lot of great grants through like Hennepin County and Ramsey Washington County Energy and Recycling that are for donation infrastructure. But that's another piece of increased communication being necessary. A lot of nonprofits aren't aware of those grants, which is part of what we do at MN 350 is contact nonprofits about grants that they can apply for that would increase their capacity to accept donated food. And lastly is recycling anything remaining. Every other solution that was presented should come before this one, because it's of course better to reduce and reuse before you recycle. This is again a graph from a chart, excuse me, from ReFed for Minnesota specifically. And if you add up how much food is composted, goes to feed for livestock, or is anaerobically digested, it's only about 30%. So there is definitely room for improvement in this sector. I was honestly surprised to see that there was such a small amount relatively that goes in the landfill. I thought it was going to be a lot more than that. But a lot of food could still be saved and composted or fed to animals. And why this doesn't always happen is because of infrastructure and sometimes apathy or lack of education about the importance of recycling food scraps. Infrastructure is especially important in urban areas where at-home composting isn't a viable option. And solutions to this are having centralized composting, where there's a specific place that people can drop off their compost, or having curbside compost options, as well as anaerobic digestion, and then policies and incentives. Interestingly, centralized composting has the capacity to save way more food waste than anaerobic digestion, but anaerobic digestion, at least from refed estimates, would save a lot more money than composting. For policies and incentives, policies are really necessary to encourage composting, or in some cases to require it. Vermont, for example, is one of 8 states that has a ban on food waste going into landfills, which has been largely successful. They, I believe, are the only state that extends that ban to residential food waste, and that sector of the supply chain, in addition to every other area where food waste is generated in Vermont, has definitely seen a decrease in food waste because of the policy. So that's something I really hope in the future is adopted in Minnesota. And for incentives, things like not having taxes on composting and recycling can be beneficial. I know in St. Paul, if you combine the Ramsey County tax and the Minnesota state tax, bringing things to landfill has like a 30% or 33% taxation rate, whereas recycling and composting don't. And I'm not sure that all states, and well, I know that not all counties have an additional tax for municipal solid waste. So that's definitely something that would encourage diverting food from the landfill. And that is the last key action item from ReFed. Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully you learned something new, and I look forward to any questions that you have.
All right, well, thanks, Cassie. We have a couple more questions in the chat, but I think I want to let Mariah talk. Your final slide there was a perfect segue into Mariah's talk. She'll be talking about Ramsey County's programs on composting. So, and then again, if you have more questions for Cassie and Mariah, put those in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. Okay, Mariah, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks. We use Microsoft Teams at work, so I'm trying to like figure out where all the different Zoom stuff is. Like I said, my name is Mariah Quick. I am a health educator for Ramsey County, and I'll be talking about our food scrap recycling programs. Before I jump into that, I wanted to give a little background on Ramsey County, just so we're all on the same page. A county is something that a lot of people don't think about that often, but it's basically an administrative geographic area that is larger than a city, but smaller than a state. Ramsey County is about 170 square miles, which makes it the smallest as far as land goes county in Minnesota, but about 1 in 10 Minnesotans actually live in our county, making us the most densely populated. There are, I think I already said, but I'll say again, 19 different cities in Ramsey County. So I work for Ramsey County, the organization, and we're divided into 5 different service areas. I'm in the health and wellness service area. Within that, I'm in public health. Within public health, I'm in the environmental health division. And everything we do in environmental health is guided by our solid waste management master plan. At this point, you may be wondering, why does the county care about my recycling and trash when my city dictates who my haulers are? That's actually something that was decided by the state government. So the state assigns counties to ensure their goal of creating an integrated waste management system that protects our land, air, water, natural resources, as well as the public's health. So that's where the county comes into all of this. And Chapter 6 of our solid waste management master plan is focused on residential organic waste, which covers both yard waste and food waste. But tonight I'll just be talking about our food scrap programs. Like Cassie went over, food waste is definitely a problem. Makes sense to be talking about it. We did a study on what was coming to the Recycling and Energy Center, which is the facility where all trash in Ramsey and Washington counties goes. So it's like a trash place basically. And we looked through the piles of trash to see what was there. And 20% of it was food waste. And then the next biggest chunk was yard waste. And I think Cassie already went over pretty well, like what contributes to food waste at a residential level. So let's just jump into talking about food scrap collection. Food scrap collection is the process of separating food items from your regular trash and then either composting at home or bringing it to a collection site. And then the food scraps are turned into compost. I'm going to talk about Ramsey County's program and where it all goes, and then where we're going in the future, just to give some context of where my talking is going. So we have a free food scrap collection program. We're calling it a drop-off program because we have a pickup program coming in the future. To get started, you can get a free food scrap collection starter kit at any of our yard waste sites and some of our libraries also now. Or you could just use a Tupperware container. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. We provide free compostable bags at our different drop-off locations. And to participate, all you have to do is put your food scraps into the compostable bag. When it's full, drop it off and then get some new bags. Pretty straightforward. The most inconvenient part, I would say, is the dropping off portion. And 2 tips I wanted to make sure that I put in here before I forget at the end is that if this is something new for you or someone in your circle, starting off small seems to be the best route to go. So something you produce regularly. I usually say coffee grounds. Most people drink coffee every morning, and just remembering to put that aside and adding in items as you go, because it can be very overwhelming, I think, to start something new when you're just used to going to the trash can. The other tip is that if you don't want to drop off that often or you're worried about smells, is you can keep your bag in the freezer and the bag won't break down, nothing will happen. It will just not smell. So those are 2 things I wanted to make sure I mentioned. Our starter kits come with 2 different bag sizes and instructions on the drop-off locations and what is accepted and not accepted. So I've said drop off like 100 times now. So what is a drop off site? Basically, it's an enclosure that has 2 dumpsters in it. And it's pretty easy. You open up the enclosure, go inside, you just do what Minette's doing here and drop your bag in. And then along the wall, there will be some like toilet paper rolls, but it's compostable bags. So we have 8 different 24/7 drop off locations around the county. That's what's on the map. And then you can also bring your food scraps to any Ramsey County yard waste site. And we split them up when we're talking about them because the yard waste sites aren't open 24/7. But that gives us 15 locations to drop off, the 2 different sizes I mentioned. And if you want to have an interactive map, you can go to ramseyrecycles.com/food scraps. So what can you put in there? You all probably have like more awareness about like composting and food scraps and recycling than maybe the average resident. But what we really try to hammer home with our food scrap drop-off program is food waste. So you can put other things there like compostable cups, plates, utensils, pizza boxes, paper egg cartons, things that have the BPI compostable logo, but we want to have really clean materials going in so we can have high quality compost coming out. And the best way to do that is just make sure that it's food, basically. So we take all food waste, even if you do backyard composting, there's still things you could bring to our drop-off locations, things like bones, meat, grease, fish, stuff that you don't want sitting around in your yard. And we also take all pet food and bird seeds. Some stuff to definitely not put in there, ashes, any type of like waste, I guess, diapers, animal waste, that kind of stuff you don't want to put into the food scrap collection. Any kind of yard waste, because that can go to our yard waste sites, and we don't want to inundate the commercial composter with a bunch of stuff that we could be composting somewhere else, because they do have kind of a capacity limit. We used to take lint, but now we don't anymore because clothes are made up of a lot of different materials, and you can't really like sort out your lint, what might have not degradable stuff in it and what stuff could biodegrade. Plastic, metal, or glass, basically put that in your recycling bin, not into the food scrap bin. Plastic bags is a big one. Please just use the compostable bags we provide, or if you don't like those, you could also order your own, but compostable bags, not plastic bags. Wood, and then wrapping paper is something that people often want to put in the food scrap recycling, but you can't. So that was a quick rundown of what the program is, what can you put in it, kind of what happens on the resident side. But you might be curious about what happens after the food scraps are collected. Oh, so Diane asked a question about, she's seen plastic bags and uncompostable items in the dumpster. What happens, or what do you do? Great question, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So this is at our yard waste site, and this company called Specialized Environmental Technologies, they're a commercial composting facility, and they'll pick up the food scraps and basically bring them to Rosemont, dump out the food scraps onto concrete pads, and then they mix the food scraps with yard waste so they can get a good exact scientific blend of carbon to nitrogen, and then spread this mixture into piles called windrows. And these piles are huge. You can kind of tell because there's equipment there, but I'll show you a Google map image to show you how big they are in a second. There's pipes that are underneath these piles, and they force air through it, and that helps the bacteria decompose the material faster. These piles get really hot, 140, 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and that high temperature will kill any seeds that are still in the food, any pathogens as well. So these piles hang out for 45, 60 days, and then they turn into something called a curing pile. So this is from the sky. Like I said, this is the Google map, and these are those big piles. So they're pretty big. The curing piles sit for about 6 months, and they're turned over a couple times to help cool down. And then once everything's cooled down to ambient air temperature, the batches are tested and screened, and then they are ready for the market as finished product, also known as compost. And compost has different uses, but mostly it's used for landscaping and gardening. So Diane asked about plastic and uncompostable items in the food scrap dumpsters. This is what happens. It sits there and it doesn't compost, it just contaminates it. And there is a threshold that SET is willing to try to make it work, but once that threshold is passed, then they can't use that material to make compost, and it has to get thrown away. So it's really important to make sure that whatever you're putting into the food scrap drop-off is actually compostable. So these are the existing options right now: at-home composting, and then food scrap drop-off program that I just described. But we do have a program coming in the future that we're calling our food scrap pickup program. So let's talk about that a little bit. I was trying to think of how can I make this slide simple. So I'll do my best to explain it and then ask questions, because it's a little different than what you might be expecting or used to. What's going to happen is we, Ramsey County, will have special durable compostable bags, and they're going to have a specific special look to them. And that will come into play in point 3. So you're going to have the food scrap bags. You'll put your food scraps in it, same as the drop off. And then you're going to put that bag into your regular curbside trash. Or if you live in an apartment, you'd put it into the dumpster. I mentioned about 10 minutes ago that all trash in Ramsey County and Washington County goes to somewhere called the R&E Center. So once all the bags get to the R&E Center, there's going to be a machine there. It's called an optical sorter, and it'll be able to identify those food scrap bags and pluck them out. And then the food scraps will go on to be composted. And there's a few reasons why we went this route, and it's all outlined on this link that I put on the screen, Ramsey, or what is it, recyclingandenergy.org. But two big ones that stand out to me is that It's more equitable. Folks that live in multi-unit housing can participate just as easily as somebody that lives in a single family home. And for folks that live in a single family home, it'll take up less room in your garage because you don't need an extra dumpster hanging out in there. It'll just go into your regular trash bin. Something I do want to say quick before anyone asks me is that what happens if you downsize your trash can because there was a drop-off program and now you're switching to a pickup program and I'm going to have all that stuff back into my trash can. We're not going to get rid of our drop-off program, and so this is just going to be an added option. So you don't have to worry about that. If you're doing the drop-off, you like the drop-off, you want to have that as an option, we're not taking it away. Just throwing that out there. So Joe asked, how many gallons will the food scraps bag hold? There'll be 2 different sizes, and it's like medium and large. So I think it's like 5-6 gallons and then a 13-gallon. Good question. The reason that it won't be smaller than that is to make sure that the machine, the optical sorter, can see it on the belt. So this is a picture of an optical sorter. This is where the arm is, and then there's a camera up here, and then it can sort stuff out. Kind of hard to just show you a still image, but I did my best. And if you're wondering, when is this all happening? Construction already started earlier this year. We're getting equipment in sometime next year and then doing pilot testing, and then it'll be available to everyone in Ramsey and Washington County by the end of next year, early 2023. So very exciting. I actually live in North St. Paul. I just moved here from Little Canada. So I'm very excited to start having a curbside option. And I want to do a quick plug for our volunteer program that I manage. It's called Recycling Ambassadors. There's a 6-week training where we kind of do a deep dive into different recycling topics, including food waste and composting. And the ask is 20 hours of volunteering a year. And we offer a $100 gift card stipend for completing the training. So if you're interested in that, you can go to RamseyRecycles.com. You can go to this wait list link I put on here. You can also email me. And here's my email. So that is my whole presentation.
Great, thanks, Mariah. Say, if I get a recycling ambassador thing and I see recycle bins in my neighborhood with garbage bags and pizza boxes and styrofoam, can I go knock on their door and tell them they messed up? Is that something I can do? Can I get a little badge or something? Excuse me.
Huh.
Recycle.
You know, that's an interesting idea. Don't some cities, they leave you a note that says, we're not picking this up because it's full of, is that something St. Paul does? I'm not sure. That's a funny idea though.
All right, well, thanks. And I wanted to mention, our group, Northeast Metro Climate Action, a lot of times we talk about systemic actions that take policy and versus independent or actions, initiatives that you can individually. And, when you talk about electricity generation or transportation, a lot of these, what we can do as individuals is just a small piece compared to the systemic actions of, oil pipelines and, coal plants and everything. In food waste, it's really a lot of individual action as far as when you look at, especially with Cassie's slides, on how much of the waste happens at the consumer side. To think that, if you only have 2 people living in your house and you go to Costco and get the 6-pack of romaine lettuce heads, you better thinking it's salad week, or else you're going to be throwing half of those away, right? So yeah, great presentations, very informative. Had a couple of other questions for Cassie in the chat. And one was from Judy about the imperfect produce business. Is that something that you're familiar with? Is that something MN350 is working with? Like all those cucumbers that weren't perfect? If there is a group that, or a company that does work with that, right? You familiar with that?
Yeah, definitely. I love the concept of imperfect produce. I definitely wish that they had imperfect produce in stores. Like if there was a section of maybe like less than desirable produce that was slightly discounted, I think that would be a better solution. And I think that sometimes imperfect produce can be a little pricier than certain grocery stores, but any action to reduce food waste is worthwhile. And I think it's a great business model and a great idea.
Yeah, is that, do you know, is that something individuals can sign up for to get access to imperfect produce?
Yeah, you can. It's like a CSA. So you can sign up and like change the frequency of how often you'll get food and what food you request. I think it's you can go in like 5 days before your box is going to be shipped out and uncheck food that you don't want and add on food. So they really have thought it through so that you're not receiving food that you're not going to use.
Great, that's great information. All right, and then Joe had a question about irradiation, which can extend product life. Are you familiar with that at all?
Not a ton, honestly. Most of my food waste knowledge is on the retail, restaurant, and consumer side of things. I do know that irradiation has been given a bit of a bad rap sometimes because it sounds like radiation, which isn't exactly what it is. But I don't feel like I have enough knowledge to really give an opinion.
Okay. Right, so there's another question here from Yogita, and it has to do with donating extra or leftover organic food to other countries. Is that even possible, or is that something that, you know, if we can do that?
That's not something I've ever heard of. Maybe in like northern Minnesota, there's food donated to Canada. I could definitely see that happening. But beyond that, no, I've never heard of that.
All right. Yeah, but you do, MN350 works with organizations that get leftover food to, you know, where does MN350 coordinate the food going to like other nonprofits? How does that work?
We don't coordinate food going to nonprofits. We what we're working on right now is like a consumer education campaign. So recognizing businesses that do donate or compost food for their work, and we're trying to make a network of those businesses that can assist. I say businesses, but specifically small restaurants that can assist other small restaurants in the Twin Cities metro area in reducing food waste. We partner with the food group and we'll do frequent like volunteering to help pack food that they grow from their farm or that they get donated to them. But we have not yet started like facilitating those donations.
Okay. Do you know, are there organizations like, I don't know, Dorothy Day, or are there other groups that help feed, you know, unprivileged and underrepresented people in food shelves or something that that's who you're working with as far as donating excess food?
We're working to partner with organizations and connect them to or to connect nonprofits to those organizations, such as like Second Harvest Heartland, and finding resources for accepting food like through the food group. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was just curious what organizations are receiving these food donations, and you know, it seems like it's very much an information thing. Some groups need food, other people have extra food. How do you get the people with extra food to get the food to the people who need the food, right?
Yeah.
So Another question here from Judy. How can we find out about local restaurants in our area that are doing composting or donating local foods so we can promote them?
Yeah, I can speak on that. We have, so we call it the Clean Plate Club. That's the club that we are contacting restaurants to join that are donating food. There's a link to our webpage on the MN350 website that I can actually put the link in the chat. We are definitely small. I think we have 17, maybe 16 restaurants that have joined so far. But we're continuously emailing and calling restaurants and asking them to join. And it's only been a few months since we started. And it seems to be growing pretty quickly, which I'm excited about. But that would be a good place to check, as well as MN350 social media. I do regular posts on Instagram and Twitter about restaurants that have joined.
I'm curious, have you seen hesitancy from some restaurants to join this, and what were their reasons?
Not hesitancy, so much as a lack of response. Actually, I don't think that anyone that I've contacted has said no. They just haven't responded, unfortunately. But for the most part, it seems like people are eager to join. There's nothing that you have to do necessarily. It's just telling us about your initiatives and letting us promote you on social media, which most restaurants are happy to sign up for.
Great. So Mariah, do you see Diane's question there? Is Ramsey County pushing composting at restaurants and grocery stores?
Yeah, I was just trying to find on the Recycling and Energy's website, we have a grant program called Biz Recycling, and says on their website they have assisted over 1,400 businesses and have awarded 900 grants. And it's to help businesses, including restaurants and such, recycle more, but that also includes food waste. So I was trying to find like the list of restaurants we've helped, but a lot of that kind of work from the recycling standpoint comes from the Recycling and Energy Center. They also have food recovery grants, but I think other parts of Ramsey County might be involved with like other food recovery, like things with shelters and stuff. But since I'm in environmental health, we're very focused on like the recycling side, so I don't have the best answer for you. Hopefully I can find this link to the, I don't know, I'll just put the Biz Recycling link in there and maybe you'll be smarter than me and be able to find the stories.
So Ramsey County is working with restaurants within the county to get composting and excess food. That's great. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
That's good. All right. Any other questions? If anybody wants to unmute and ask a vocal question. All right. One other thought I had before leaving is, we always had this idea that you don't want to throw away good food, right? And if you have leftovers, one of the excuses sometimes you just put the leftovers in the refrigerator until they're bad food. And then you're not throwing away good food, but that really doesn't solve the problem. So if you do have leftovers, you need to Kate put a point in earlier, you have to kind of change your mindset from what do I want to eat to what should I eat before it goes bad, right? And that really helps in keeping the amount of food waste down on an individual level. And you can really reduce that waste. All right, one more call for any other questions. Well, I really want to thank Mariah and Cassie. Very informative, great talks, and really appreciate you coming on and talking to our group and our followers. I think everybody I'm sure had something they can take with them out of those two talks that can help them reduce food waste to get a better idea of why it's important and what's happening to our food scraps as well. So, all right. All right, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.